Meet Christina Rane King, known to her loved ones as Cricket, a nickname that echoed her small stature but large spirit. Her life, once filled with the laughter of her children and the support of a devoted husband, took a dramatic turn when faced with financial burdens. This shift led Christina down a path that would eventually intertwine her fate with the darkest elements of society. Christina was born in 1972 and lived in Kansas City, Kansas. Her husband was Christopher Wayne Goodall, a roofer by profession. He was a devoted spouse. The couple had their first child, April, in 1988. 3 years later, her younger sister Ashley came along. Now that the family could not be supported by Christopher's job alone, Christine made the decision to seek out other sources of income. Sources claim that she started providing escort services in exchange for money in the Central Street area. At some point, Christopher went to jail, and Christina appeared to have given up hope. The general view among those who knew her was that, despite her reputation in the society, she was a good person. However, her circumstances had sent her to the streets, where she had to deal with the harsh realities of a society that frequently ignored the humanity hidden beneath labels. Christina was imprisoned for a short while, but her subsequent release marked an unsettling turn in her life. The day she got out turned out to be her last day. In 1998, April was in 5th class, enjoying her 10th Christmas when the family got the devastating news. On Christmas morning, December 25th, some boys were scavenging for metal scraps they could sell at the junkyard to make a few bucks. They were searching for salvageable bits in the driveway of an abandoned nursing center. Then, in the chillingly quiet winter morning, they stumbled upon a partially clothed body that had been battered, bruised, and dumped like trash. Her head had been struck with blunt force injuries, and her pants were pulled down halfway. The victim's bra, shoes, and other personal items were lying there right next to her body. Her face appeared to have been crushed in a gruesome manner. The KCPD told the family, and their lives were forever changed. Christina King, age 26, had been found deceased, and it remained a mystery as to who might have killed her and why. Penny Barnett, Christina's mother, often checked in with the KCPD to see if any new information was available. Police did in fact have a lead, a used condom found at the crime scene close to Christina's body, but they didn't tell Barnett about it. In actuality, they displayed a great deal of ineptitude and negligence, but we'll get to that shortly. At one point on a phone call, police officer Teree was so harsh with Penny Barnett that she hung up the phone crying. Her husband inquired as to why, to which she replied that Detective Mast had been insensitive and uttered derogatory remarks about Christina. There was blatant discrimination against Christina at multiple times. The family was informed by the police that, as a streetwalker, she was just another casualty, implying that she wasn't worth it or so. Later in life, April saw her mother's autopsy photographs and was horrified upon learning how many injuries, abrasions, and bruises her mom had suffered. Christina's death, though, had already broken the family. However, in 2010, Christopher Goodall passed away, leaving the two girls orphaned. Ashley was 14 years old and April was 17, and they had been living by themselves for 5 years. Ashley revealed that she used to stroll across Quindaro in an effort to find the person who took her mother's life. Quindaro was a ghost town in the 1990s, an abandoned community. It was not safe. Yearning for answers, she kept finding herself in dangerous situations. Ashley did once get into a truck with a man she suspected was involved in her mother's killing. The man was allegedly under suspicion for drug possession, since a significant quantity of his illegal substances were taken by 2 other women and Christina King's cousin. However, that was merely a street rumor. He proved to be not the guy Ashley was looking for, and fortunately didn't hurt her. 2 decades had passed, and there hadn't been any progress. In December 2021, the family came together for a prayer vigil and balloon release on North 27th Street and Sewell Avenue. The vigil had been organized by Justice for Wyandotte, an advocacy group devoted to fighting for transparency in law enforcement. It supported the families of people victimized by the law itself, who thereby complied to assist in Christina King's investigation. The whole thing was put together by Khadijah Hardaway of the Justice of Wyandotte Group. She highlighted the worth of cases like this whilst speaking to the public, saying that it emphasized how important it was for the Kansas Police Department to set up a cold case unit. She requested the newly appointed Chief of Police to allocate money from the available funds and set up a cold case unit. Hardaway stated that this step would improve transparency in handling the latest investigations, as well as cold cases. This set off a chain reaction within the KCPD that ultimately resulted in Christina's case being solved. Carl Oakman, who was sworn in as the next Chief of Police on January 1, 2021, decided to take this seriously and promised to establish a cold case section as soon as he took over the office. A year passed, and he successfully established Kansas City's first cold case unit, as promised, and it was operational by January 2022. By hiring 3 investigators full-time, it would aid in solving long-standing unsolved cases. Why Justice for Wyandotte was formed. The reason is crucial to understand in the first place. It all started with Pearl Davis, a 43-year-old mother. Pearl Davis was born in 1953. She was Imam Hanif Khalil's niece and Khadijah Hardaway's cousin, mother of 2 children, Aisha Musawwir and Quadria Musawwir. Pearl also went by the name Sameemah Musawwir. She was a member of the Islamic community of Kansas City, a dedicated worker who did everything in her power to support her kids. She was a skilled seamstress who worked as a garment tailor, whilst also operated a transportation service that would provide rides to the Chillicothe Correctional. She additionally was an SRS driver, managed a daycare, served dinner and bean pies, and actively engaged in her family's lives, carrying out a wide range of responsibilities. Pearl was highly socially active, so everyone felt her absence right away. Regretfully, Pearl's lifeless body was discovered in an abandoned house on the 700 block of Lafayette Avenue in Kansas City on November 22, 1996. That house was of her deceased mom. Pearl had been viciously stabbed for more than 40 times as per her autopsy report. Her clothes were taken off and were scattered around. Detective Roger Golubski of the KCPD was in charge of the case. He was accused of several different offenses. On multiple occasions, Detective Golubski abused his position of power. Between 1983 and 2008, the KCPD neglected to look into the cases of multiple women who were killed in a similar way, most of whom were of similar ages and were working women. Oftentimes, these women had to deal with homelessness, addiction to substance, or handing out escort services. Their tragic fates frequently revolve around violent approaches such as strangulation, other forms of asphyxiation, blunt force trauma, or stabbing. Their bodies were mercilessly left in vacant buildings or far-off places. These women were found partially or completely naked, with their blouses or trousers pulled down, forming an ominous pattern. Last but not least, the victim's clothing was always discovered close by. All of these horrendous scenarios were sadly experienced by Christina King. As the time went on, and the cases remained unsolved, it became increasingly clear that there was a problem with Golubski. None of the case files included information that Roger Golubski provided about the women who were ruthlessly unalived, despite the fact that he knew most, if not all, of them. Even with so much potentially useful physical evidence at disposal for examination, the majority of the aforementioned cases did not receive enough forensic scrutiny. Due to this, either little evidence was gathered or little was done to find potential perpetrators whose DNA or other forensic findings could have been examined. The KCPD's negligence was astounding. In the case of Christina King, they got a DNA match with a possible suspect, but didn't launch a follow-up investigation. After witnessing the Golubski victims' repeated requests for justice being ignored, Khadijah Hardaway took it upon herself to work with the locals and arrange protests and rallies. The objective was to prevent the cold cases, the faces of the victims, and their stories from disappearing into nothingness. Inspired by Pearl's case, she teamed up with other like-minded females in 2020 to form a nonprofit organization entitled Justice for Wyandotte. The organization put in a lot of effort to get rid of the dishonest people within the department. Police was observed to be misusing power, bullying, harassing, fabricating evidence, wrongfully arresting people, and forcing victims to deliver false testimony in order to avoid being falsely charged and jailed. We appreciate Justice for Wyandotte for bringing attention to the crimes that reveal the systemic corruption. They brought up the example of Lamont McIntyre's case, who was wrongfully imprisoned and served 23 years in prison for a crime he hadn't committed. He was apprehended on the watch of Roger Golubski. Even after Lamont being cleared in 2017, he never saw justice, while Golubski remained unpunished and lived a free life. Nevertheless, there was still a lot of information about Golubski's repeated harassment against women. During her years with the organization, Hardaway arranged a meeting between herself and Carl Oakman, who was running for chief of police at the time. In this discussion, she spoke about the blatant and inexcusable lack of attention to the unsolved cold cases in the community, highlighting the long-term effects on families and loved ones in Kansas City. She firmly supported the setting up of a cold case unit within the Kansas City Police Department. In an effort to address the many unresolved crimes that had occurred in Kansas City since 1965, Justice for Wyandotte started an awareness campaign and petition for the establishment of a separate cold case section after meeting with Oakman. Back in 2003, police got a DNA match on the condom discovered next to Christina's beaten body. The suspect had been identified as Gary Davis. Remarkably, though, he was not taken in right away to be questioned. Gary Davis was under strict surveillance by Wyandotte County Community Corrections, yet it took 14 months to interrogate him. Gary Davis, who is 52 years old, lived in Kansas City, but between the ages of 23 and 25 at the time of Christina and Pearl's alleged incidents, he was a truck driver. Given that his line of work required him to travel great distances from the site of crimes, it seemed reasonable that he wouldn't have established any connections at the time. Police were aware of Davis's whereabouts at all the times, yet it took them 2 decades to finally apprehend him. It was a painstaking process that appeared to be taking forever. It took the department 14 months just to question the suspect, and then there was complete silence for 20 years. Then, following the public appeal of Justice for Wyandotte in 2021, it took another 18 months to analyze the DNA, designate a team, and eventually apprehend the offender. The cold case unit established the connections in 2022, and it appeared right away. The DNA recovered from both the crime scenes aligned with that of Gary Davis Sr., the initial suspect. Police additionally came across a Facebook page that matched Davis's name and profile. The page had a variety of contentious and unpleasant posts, but the majority were about truck driving and the disparities in treatment between men and women in society. When officers attempted to contact him, they discovered that of the 3 registered phone numbers he had, only one was active, but its voicemail box was full, so no additional messages could be delivered. Ultimately, in September 2023, Davis was taken into custody and charged with slaying Christina King. A $500,000 bond was imposed on him. Furthermore, there was no statute of limitations. Thus, regardless of how long ago the offense was committed, the cases could still be prosecuted, and he would be accused, tried, and deemed guilty. If found guilty, his sentence would be life in prison. Surprisingly, Kansas City Police Chief Carl Oakman and Wyandotte County District Attorney Mark Dupree conducted a press conference to commend their investigation efforts. Dupree claimed that the investigators had worked relentlessly, whilst Oakman minimized the importance of the DNA finding and emphasized the necessity for a thorough investigation. They even downplayed the significance of a DNA hit, arguing that it took labor to analyze and make sure that the right individual was apprehended. Regarding Golubski, the corrupt culture inside the KCPD was brought to light by Kansas City attorney Cheryl Pilot in March of 2022. She filed a statement with the intention of indicting not just the now-disgraced detective Roger Golubski, but also the entire class that supported him. Golubski, in charge of wrongful arrest, was charged with federal violations which include abduction, intimate assault, and trafficking. Since Davis was a long-haul trucker who lived thousands of miles away, the KCPD is currently collaborating with other law enforcement agencies to investigate whether he was involved in any other homicides that occurred in the area. Presently, at least 8 different cases involve Davis as a suspect or person of interest. Thanks to Justice for Wyandotte, the Cold Case Unit was founded and ultimately went on to solve 11 more cases. It is reasonable to presume that the KCPD bears some responsibility for delaying an arrest, which could have been done years earlier, by almost 30 years. The relatives of the victims deserved an apology and explanation from the department. As the department's incompetence caused years of suffering for the bereaved family members, particularly Christina's daughters, who yearned for closure. What steps should be taken to prevent such failures in the future? Your insights and opinions are crucial as we continue to chase the light of truth in the shadows of the past. The lifeless body of a woman was discovered on December 6, 1975, in a field near 100th Avenue and Lowell Boulevard in Westminster, Colorado. She was spotted by 2 men on their motorbikes. Her dress, along with her personal belongings, had likewise been recovered from the crime scene. Later, that was used to identify her as Teree Becker. At the time, her age was 20 years old. Teree, who was born and raised in Casper, Wyoming, relocated to the Denver metropolitan region following her high school graduation. Teree's family and loved ones characterized her as free-spirited. She led an adventurous life. Teree liked painting and music. Steppenwolf and the Three Dog Night were her 2 favorite bands. An autopsy of her body was conducted, which revealed that she had been assaulted and strangled. 2 days before, Teree had hitched a ride to visit her boyfriend at the Adams County Detention Center in Brighton, Colorado. The lead detective on the investigation, Chandra Thurston, a senior criminalist with the Westminster PD, stated that her body had been ditched in the field. Officers showed up, the investigation started, and eventually, after looking into suspects for some time, they still had no lead, so the case went cold. A similar incident occurred in 1991. In her apartment on the 1000 block of West Monroe Avenue, close to Owens and H Street in Las Vegas, Nevada, 31-year-old Sherrie Bridgewater, mother of 2 boys, had been assaulted and unlived. Her body had been discovered by 2 other women, a friend and a relative. Sadly, despite the investigating team's years of tireless effort, the case ended without a resolution. 12 years later, in 2003, DNA was collected from a piece of evidence from Teree's case by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. The sample from an unidentified man was submitted to CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System database, yet there hadn't been any match. A decade later, in 2013, the Las Vegas Metro Police Department added DNA from Sherrie's assailant to its database. The sample matched with Teree's attacker, implying a connection between the 2 cases. Prior to the DNA breakthrough, neither of the cases had a suspect. In 2019, technological advancements and genetic genealogy suggested the possibility of a guy named Thomas Martin Elliott, a veteran with a lengthy criminal past. He was given a 6-year prison term for breaking and entering into a home in Lakewood, Colorado. After being freed in 1981, he committed a serious offense against a minor, a 13-year-old girl, in Carson City, Nevada. He was sentenced to a lifetime in prison, but with the possibility of release. After gaining his freedom a decade later, he emerged as the main suspect in the unsolved Las Vegas case. On October 30, 1991, 5 months later, he killed himself by self-inflicted gunshot. He was 40 years old at the time. Because of his brief military service, he was laid to rest in the Southern Nevada Veterans Memorial Cemetery. The Las Vegas police didn't have enough resources to thoroughly look into Elliott as a potential suspect. In October 2023, after requesting support from the Vegas Justice League, an organization that has assisted the department in solving various cold cases, they were able to secure the funding from them, allowing officers to exhume Elliott's remains for DNA testing. Recently, in 2024, it had been confirmed. It gave a positive match for both Teree and Sherrie's cases. The fact that Elliott was adopted by his mother's second husband presented a challenge for the identification and relating of the DNA. His biological mother, Nece West, had separated from his actual father and went on to marry once more. Although Elliott's relationship with Teree remained unknown, the police discovered that he and Sherrie were regular attendees of the same Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Chandra Thurston, senior criminalist with the Westminster Police Department, stated that it was almost a huge relief to finally hold someone accountable for what happened with Teree, now that we have a name. Throughout the whole investigation, there were undoubtedly moments when you thought, "I'm never going to figure this out. We're never going to figure this out." There is a great deal of relief, and I hope she knows that we never gave up on her and that we searched for justice, even if it has to be this way, without being able to charge anyone. We want her to know that she matters and that we always value her. There have been many ups and downs in this case, according to A.C. Stutson, Commander in Investigations with Westminster Police. There had been numerous instances when we were this close and it would slip away. Teree's brother, David Becker, is the sole surviving family member. He resides in Texas and made the following statement: "I don't have the words to express how grateful I am. I simply want to thank the Westminster Police Department. It's amazing that even after 45 years the DNA can be matched and provide closure, and for that, I'm grateful. I find comfort in the fact that this guy isn't out there taking the lives of other siblings." For Westminster Police, the case was revolutionary. It was the oldest as well as the first cold case they had ever solved. This case started in 1975, and as someone who has represented the agency for years, Westminster Chief Norm Hobart stated, "It is a sense of relief that we were able to close this for the family, as well as an enormous sense of pride and accomplishment for the agency." The organization is proud to have closed the case today and salutes all the men and women who worked on it. Regretfully, Sherrie's parents died before the person who had stolen her from them could be identified. The police were able to get in touch with her 2 adult sons and provide some closure for her family, according to LVMPD Lieutenant Johansson. Furthermore, the department is reviewing data, he stated, to determine whether any other cases could be linked to the same suspect. On October 19, 2003, 2 fishermen came across the lifeless body of a man in a drainage area on the yellow freight property at 2627 State Road in Bensalem Township. That man didn't have any identification on him, and his description did not fit any of the people who had been reported missing in the area at the time. An autopsy was conducted, which revealed that the victim had drowned, and his body didn't show any sign of trauma. However, the manner of death was not established by the authorities. That man was said to be in his 30s or 40s. Investigators obtained partial fingerprints, but they were not consistent with any known fingerprints in the national database. Likewise, the investigators collected samples for DNA testing. Over the following 19 years, Bensalem police compared the unidentified man to multiple missing person reports, but to no luck. In the Doylestown Cemetery, he was laid to rest under a placeholder name on a tombstone, while efforts to identify him continued. Chris McMullen, a former Bensalem Township police detective and cold case investigator, 54 years old at the time, became preoccupied with finding a modern way to solve open-ended cases. In 2022, he established Cold Case Initiative, a nonprofit to assist in funding these costly investigations. In December 2022, Bensalem police received the hair samples from the Bucks County Coroner's Office that were taken during the autopsy. The samples were then submitted to a private laboratory that used it to generate a DNA profile. This was all funded by the Cold Case Initiative. In October 2023, the search and following investigation led the police to a man's doorstep who claimed that his son had gone missing around the time the body was discovered. He gave a sample of his DNA and it matched. Subsequently, the deceased was identified as Edward Anthony Nece. "This one is our first solve so far," McMullen stated. "We are so excited." Edward's father, a 75-year-old retired diesel mechanic, said he feels a bit hazy and confused about everything right now. He added, "I waited 20 years for word about my son." He would make trips to the police stations with his ex-wife to file missing persons reports and to inquire as to whether the officers had discovered any new information. This was before the days of cell phones, when you might be able to locate someone, he mentioned. He also mentioned how close his house was to the location where his son's body was discovered. "I just found it extremely hard to believe someone could go missing less than a mile from your house, and it takes 2 decades to find out," he said. "I do not know what to say. I have felt relief but sadness, but then I get to have closure." He was buried properly. His mother and I had been up to the cemetery, and we changed that nameplate from an unknown to his name. We are now in the process of putting up a gravestone. At the time of the discovery, Edward was employed as a forklift operator at a trucking company in Delanco. He was really happy, making real good money. For him, everything were going great. A representative of Bensalem Police remarked, "We would like to recognize the diligent effort of Bensalem Township Police Department detectives and the Cold Case Initiative Partnership. Without their assistance, the family of Edward Anthony Nece would still be wondering what happened to their loved one." Although the man has been identified, authorities are yet to disclose whether they have established the cause of death and whether foul play was involved. If you find this video compelling, show your support by giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel, and ringing that notification bell. By doing so, you'll stay updated about the latest investigations and mysteries. Your support means the world to us as we continue to pursue the truth in the world of cold cases.